The observation chamber aboard the vessel glistened with pale blue light as translucent screens floated in midair, displaying streams of data, archived transmissions, and emotional analyses of the human species. The delegates gathered, shimmering beings of energy, scaled diplomats from the Wraith, tacticians from Velox Prime, all curious and cautious. They had long observed humanity with interest, but also confusion. Their capacity for kindness, empathy, and innovation seemed endless, yet beneath the surface, there was something unpredictable. Some called it chaos, others called it genius. No species in the council had yet defined it. The lead analyst with crystalline skin that refracted the chamber's light stood calmly at the center. His voice chimed melodically as he addressed the room. We have watched them offer shelter to the vulnerable and kindness to strangers. We have seen them turn enemies into allies with laughter and forgiveness. Yet, when threatened, they become something else entirely. Why? The chamber hummed with silence as the question hovered, both literal and figurative, on a projected glyph. Gestured, and a recording played. Human children in a park, laughing, running, sharing food. Gentle creatures, murmured of the Velox, his mandibles clicking softly. The projection shifted. Soldiers in humanitarian operations, building shelters after disasters on worlds not their own. Compassionate beyond logic, observed of the. Then the final projection, footage from the Beordan skirmish 2 years prior. A human unit had been cornered, outnumbered 10-1. But instead of retreat, they fought with terrifying focus, routing a force 5 times their size. Their movements were not fueled by panic. They were surgical, relentless, and cold. The silence in the room thickened. I have spent decades watching them, continued. Their default nature leans toward peace and collaboration. But if you harm something they love, he paused, eyes reflecting fractals of light, they become something else. He turned to the floating analysis chart, spikes in adrenaline, but also in cognitive clarity and strategic awareness. Rage, tempered by discipline. Fury, harnessed into purpose. It was not random violence. It was targeted, efficient, and precise. We must understand, he continued softly, what awakens this side of them. What line, when crossed, transforms them from builders to destroyers. The chamber rippled with murmurs. An ambassador from the Confederation tilted her scaled head. Are they dangerous? Hesitated. Only if you mistake kindness for weakness. Another delegate pressed. Could they turn on us? The analyst considered carefully. Only if we threaten what they cherish. They are not conquerors, they are defenders. But when the call comes to defend, they will go farther than any species we've known. A young observer, a shimmering, from the colonies, hesitantly raised her voice. They value family above survival, loyalty above safety, and hope above certainty. But could that be exploited? Shook his crystalline head. No. Because they protect each other so fiercely that any attempt to manipulate those bonds will only fuel their resolve. He raised a hand and summoned one final projection, a battlefield in deep space. Human ships had taken heavy damage, and escape was impossible. Yet instead of surrendering, they shielded the last civilian vessel with their hulls, holding the line until reinforcements arrived. The footage ended with a human commandant's final transmission. For those we love. For those who will never know our names. We hold. The chamber sat in stunned silence. No analysis could fully quantify that kind of resolve. Spoke softly now. They do not fight for power, or for empire. They fight for each other, for family, for ideals they refuse to let die. That is their weapon. The council's deliberation continued long into the cycle. But when truth had crystallized, humanity's power did not come from their technology or their numbers. It came from something far more dangerous, their capacity to love deeply, and their refusal to let that love be threatened without response. In that fragile vessel of compassion lay the heart of their fury, and the source of their unbreakable strength. The training fields of lunar outpost South stretched far beyond the horizon, bathed in the silvery light of Earth's reflection. Rows of cadets sprinted in perfect unison, their faces focused but calm. Above them, drones floated silently, capturing every detail. But this was no ordinary training. Watching from a high observation deck were delegates from several alien species, the analysts, the Wraith strategists, and the Velox tacticians, all invited by human command to witness the chaos of their unshakable resolve. The visitors expected drills, weapon demonstrations, and displays of superior technology. Instead, they found something far more unsettling. Commandant Eli Grant, dressed in a simple black flight suit without rank insignia, addressed both the cadets and the alien observers. His voice was steady, every word carefully measured. Today, you will not be tested on strength or endurance. Today, you will be tested on loyalty, trust, and sacrifice. The alien delegates exchanged puzzled glances. The cadets stood at attention, eyes forward, not blinking. At Grant's signal, a giant holographic field materialized, simulating a chaotic beta scenario. The environment shifted. Burning cities, collapsing buildings, and desperate civilians calling for help. The cadets were given an order: rescue as many as possible. The aliens watched, expecting strategic formations and calculated efficiency. What they saw was chaos transformed into order by instinct. Cadets did not hesitate. They dove into simulated infernos to pull out virtual children. They shielded strangers with their bodies. They made decisions not based on probability but on heart, and succeeded where logic would have failed. Some cadets carried multiple wounded figures on their backs, refusing to leave anyone behind. Others formed protective circles, creating human shields around the vulnerable. Of the murmured, "They are reckless." Commandant Grant, hearing him, turned calmly. "No," he said. "They are committed." In the simulation, one cadet was pinned beneath virtual debris. Another cadet, instead of moving on to save more units as the scenario score recommended, stayed behind, lifting the debris piece by piece, though it meant failing the time limit. The aliens didn't understand. After all, efficiency dictated sacrifice. The simulation ended. Grant walked slowly down to the cadets, his voice quieter now. Pass or fail does not matter. Only this question matters. Did you leave anyone behind? The cadets stood silent, many with tears in their eyes. Grant placed a hand on one young soldier's shoulder. "Good." He turned to the alien delegates. "That's why we fight the way we do." The observation deck filled with murmurs, some skeptical, some odd. Of the Velox spoke. "But this loyalty, it is a weakness. It slows them down." Grant smiled softly, but his eyes sharpened. "Only to those who don't understand what it does to the ones who survive." The next phase of the demonstration began: psychological resilience. A series of impossible choices flashed on the screens before cadets. Save the colonists or the command ship, protect one child or 50 strangers. In every scenario, the cadets chose instinctively. They prioritized protecting the innocent over strategy, empathy over cold calculation. The aliens watched in disbelief as cadets sacrificed themselves in simulated scenarios repeatedly, refusing to abandon even the faintest hope of rescue for others. Avda turned to Commandant Grant. "But what does this gain you? These are simulations." Grant's expression darkened just slightly. "It trains them to never accept the loss of life as inevitable. When the real fight comes, they will do the impossible because they never learned to believe otherwise." The final demonstration was simple. Each cadet was asked to write a letter to someone they loved, a parent, a sibling, a partner, and then place it into a small capsule. The alien observers watched, puzzled. Asked, "Is this a ritual?" Grant nodded. "It's a promise. Before they fight, they remind themselves who they're fighting for." The observation deck fell silent as the capsules lifted into the air and dispersed across the artificial sky like stars. Grant looked each alien delegate in the eye. "You wanted to know what turns us into warriors. It's not rage. It's not vengeance. It's the unwillingness to let down those we love. It's the fire that burns when we think of them waiting for us to come home. His crystalline form shimmering with new understanding, spoke softly. I thought I understood. I did not. Grant smiled, not unkindly. Few do. He looked back out over the cadets. But you'll see soon enough. On the battlefield, it's not armor or weapons that make us unstoppable. It's the promise they carry in their hearts. The battlefield was a shattered wasteland of jagged rock and swirling red dust. The alien coalition forces had formed ranks, their armored units bristling with plasma shields and designed for resilience and brute strength. Across from them, the swarm advanced in endless waves of chittering, writhing creatures, their minds linked in cold, calculating unity. At the heart of this chaos, the humans stood apart. No heavy armor, no towering machines, just tactical uniforms, light packs, and focused eyes. The alien generals had called it foolish. But they hadn't yet witnessed what drove humanity when the stakes were life and death. Captain Mara Steele crouched behind a jagged boulder, her breath even, her pulse steady. Around her, her unit waited, each member watching, listening, but not for commands. They were listening for each other. The hum of swarm wings filled the air, and the ground vibrated as another wave of creatures surged forward. The alien observers watching from a distant ridge saw it unfold in disbelief. The swarm should have overwhelmed them by sheer numbers. But the humans didn't stand their ground. They danced. Their movements were fluid and predictable. They shifted positions with no verbal orders, covering blind spots instinctively, pivoting to protect one another like extensions of the same body. Laser blasts and sonic pulses filled the air, but the humans moved too fast, too close, too low. They fought with numbers and ferocity. The humans fought with intuition and trust. Two soldiers, pinned behind a crumbling wall, locked eyes for just a second. No words needed. And when sprinted into open fire to draw the swarm's attention, trusting completely that his partner would flank and rescue him. And she did, with a single fluid movement that took her through enemy lines, her blade flashing, her pulse rifle humming softly. She dragged him clear and patched his wound with practiced hands, even as the swarm regrouped. The alien commandants observing from afar whispered to one another, unable to comprehend. They adapted rapidly to predictable patterns, but the humans had none. Their tactics weren't strategy, they were instinct honed through loyalty. No soldier left behind. No hesitation. Every risk taken for someone they called family. A massive beast burst from the ground, a towering monstrosity with spined carapace and mandibles. It roared, shaking the very air. The alien coalition forces froze, uncertain. But the human squad didn't hesitate. Mara locked eyes with her unit sergeant. She didn't order him, she simply nodded. He sprinted forward, leaping onto the beast's leg, drawing fire toward himself while others placed charges on its exposed underbelly. The sergeant was thrown aside, his body broken, but two others were already pulling him to safety, applying mid-foam and whispering encouragement even as the beast detonated in a blast of acidic gore. High on the ridge, the alien observers stood in silence. They are reckless, Van whispered. No, another replied softly. They are relentless. The battle raged on, but something shifted. The swarm began to hesitate. Their hive logic couldn't predict these human movements, couldn't comprehend this blind loyalty that defied probability. The humans fought with fire in their eyes, their small squad holding a position that mathematically should have fallen hours ago. In the heart of the chaos, Mara crouched next to the injured sergeant, her hand steady on his shoulder. You stay with me, she whispered. He nodded weakly, but there was a spark in his eyes. Not defeat. Pride. Around them, her squad tightened their perimeter, every move made to protect one another, to hold together. Then came the moment that would be burned into every observer's memory. A young corporal, pinned beneath rubble with swarm creatures descending, screamed for help. Two human soldiers broke formation, sprinting toward him with no regard for their own safety. Plasma bolts rained down, swarm creatures lunged, but the soldiers didn't falter. They reached him, lifted the debris together, and dragged him clear. Both were injured, but both were smiling. High above, Van Alien General, cold and logical until now, spoke softly to his aide. This is why they are feared. His aide whispered, because they cannot be broken. The general shook his head slowly. Because they refuse to break each other. As the sun set over the battlefield and the last swarm beasts fell, the human squad gathered around their wounded, checking each one personally, lifting them gently, carrying them to safety on their backs. They didn't celebrate. They didn't cheer. They simply made sure everyone made it home. And from the ridge, every alien observer understood, finally and fully, what turned humans into ruthless warriors. Not hatred, not conquest, but love. Love for the person beside them, love for those waiting at home, love fierce enough to face death without fear. The council chamber was silent, save for the soft hum of holographic displays flickering above the long, curved table. Alien dignitaries from dozens of worlds sat in tense anticipation, their elaborate ceremonial armor gleaming in cold light. Their eyes, varied in color and shape, all turned toward the tall, unarmored human standing at the center of the room. Ambassador Mara Steele's uniform was plain compared to the ornate regalia around her. No protective plating, no shield generators, no bodyguards. Just fabric, skin, and eyes that held something far more formidable than any alloy. Resolve. The Elden speaker of the clicked his mandibles, breaking the silence. Human, he began, his voice clicking and echoing. You have brought reports that your forces succeeded where entire coalitions failed. You routed the swarm at prime. His compound eyes narrowed. Explain how you endure without protection. Mara's gaze swept the room slowly. Her voice was steady and calm. We do not endure without protection. We carry it inside. There was a ripple of murmurs. Some scoffed. Others looked at her with curiosity. She let the silence linger before continuing. You build thicker walls, heavier armor, stronger shields. We build each other. On the battlefield, we stand for one another. We fall for one another. That bond is stronger than any meta. The council members shifted in their seats. The representative, encased in shimmering, that pulsated with energy, spoke next. Such sentiment is admirable. But sentiment does not stop swarm talons from ripping flesh. Why does this loyalty make you more dangerous than the swarm? Mara smiled gently, though her eyes stayed hard. Because they fight for instinct. We fight for love. She paused, letting the word settle in a room that rarely spoke of such things. The swarm calculates survival. We calculate sacrifice. We will charge into death itself for those we love. No enemy can prepare for that. The High Warden bristled, her scales shifting shades of crimson. Foolish, she hissed. Emotion clouds judgment. Mara turned toward her and flinching. Emotion sharpens ours. Have you ever watched a human run toward danger not because they think they can win, but because they refuse to leave someone behind? You cannot reason with that. You cannot that. That's what terrifies your enemies, and sometimes your allies. A long silence followed. The Grand Arbiter of the Council adjusted his robes. His 6 eyes blinked slowly as he considered her. We have seen human ferocity. We have feared it. But today we begin to understand it. He leaned forward slightly. Why do you not wear armor here, in this chamber, surrounded by those who may not trust you? Mara's answer was soft but carried weight. Because armor says I expect harm. Vulnerability says I trust. And I've learned that trust disarms faster than any weapon. The chamber grew quiet again. Then the doors opened, and a procession of human soldiers entered, none in armor. Just uniforms and medals earned through blood and sacrifice. They carried something between them. Not weapons, but holographic recordings from the battlefield. They placed the devices on the table, and flickering images filled the air. There were scenes of humans dragging injured comrades through fire. Humans lifting alien soldiers into evacuation ships, shielding them with their own bodies. Humans holding the line long after exhaustion should have broken them, because someone was counting on them. The images faded. The silence was heavier now. The elden speaker of the leaned back slowly. We mistook it for recklessness, he admitted. The representative looked at Mara with no respect. You were your strongest armor in your hearts. Mara inclined her head. Exactly. Then, quietly, from the far side of the chamber, a voice spoke, when that hadn't contributed yet. It was the youngest representative, from a world newly accepted into the council. Her voice trembled but steadied. And what happens when one of you falls? When someone you love is lost? Mara's gaze softened. We grieve. We break. But then we rise. And every time we rise stronger. Because the ones we've lost don't leave us. They become part of why we fight. Tears glistened in the young representative's eyes, and she whispered, "That's beautiful." Mara nodded gently. It's also terrifying. To our enemies, because they cannot kill what lives in our hearts. To ourselves, because losing someone means carrying their memory like fire in our veins. But we would not trade it for invulnerability. The Grand Arbiter stood. Slowly, the rest of the council followed suit. He inclined his head toward her. We have spent centuries fortifying ourselves with steel and stone. Today, we have learned that the strongest fortress is built of trust, loyalty, and sacrifice. The council chamber erupted, not into applause, but into solemn, respectful silence. Mara exhaled slowly. She hadn't come to intimidate them. But she knew they would never look at humanity the same way again.